Again, my name is Louis Schiff. I'm the Executive Director of Birthing of Giants Fellowship Week. And so I was just saying that the theme and the thrust of this presentation today is to make those of you who work in the executive teams and the teams of the companies whose CEO, president, owner was in attendance last week at the University of Texas at Austin's Fellowship Week, feel like you're connected to what went on there. We'll be having questions from people along the way. Everyone's welcome and happy to join in and contribute. So what you're looking at is basically the sign that the fellow entrepreneurs saw when they joined us at the University of Texas at Austin. Now, who were they? They were 19 business owners, all of them owners of fast-growing companies, private companies, what we call closely held companies. And they were all in attendance for the same reason, which is every one of them runs an important company back home that does great work and works with great people. And their goal was to do it even better than they do it before, to learn from best practices, to learn from each other, to learn from the research about what makes companies grow. And I just want to share with you what they went through, how dedicated they were to this process, and how vulnerable they made themselves, so that as you're thinking about what they've talked to you about from the week, you'll remember how hard they are working and how vulnerable they are making to make your company bigger, better, and greater. And I'm just going to share this. When they walked into the room, we had this big amphitheater style classroom where we all worked together at the University of Texas. And the very first thing we asked them to do was to send an email to 10 people that they know and trust and admire in their work lives, and ask them what they think, what each CEO in that room thinks they're best at. Why am I sharing this with you? Because I want you to know that they were ready, willing, and able to do something that is very, very difficult. Because I just ask each of you who are in attendance today, how comfortable would you be asking 10 people from your life, people you've worked with in the past, current people, your clients, things like that, what they think you're good at? Well, these folks in the room did it, and they did it happily because they were there to learn. Some of you may have actually received these emails from the CEO, presidents of your organizations, but I can share with you that when the results came back, there was a lot of processing that had to go on. Who am I? How do I contribute value? And again, it just gives you a glimpse into how vulnerable they made themselves during this week. For 5 days, we studied 4 important concepts that bubbled up into 4 pillars that yielded 4 big ideas that'll result in 4 outcomes. But the biggest thing of all we focused on was something called 1 year from today. What's that vision of the company 1 year from now? And so we worked really hard for the week. And I'm going to share with you 4 of the concepts that we explored and 4 of the pillars. And then we're going to show you how they brought it back to you to see how you can, bring this back to everybody. Let's see, bring this back to everybody for a huge outcome. Again, they made themselves vulnerable. They gave up a week of their lives away from their families and away from their offices. They spent time and money to be there. And their goal was to create big outcomes, and we call it 1 year from today. So the first concept is we call it no man's land. What kind of outcome are they trying to create for their companies? So again, these are 19 businesses, 19 different industries, 19 different parts of the country or the world, and 19 different individuals running them with different goals, different expectations, different educations, different life stories. And so we asked them, do you want to build what we call a small giant? This is a company that is highly profitable, that's fun to run, everybody knows everybody. It's small, but it's a giant, meaning a great phrase we use is you don't have to be big to be great. And you can run a small company, that's great. And so, is that what they want to run? Or we ask them, do they want to run something huge? Maybe go public one day, huge outcomes, take on their biggest competitors, things like that. Or we ask them, do they want to run a company that's really, really smartly run that can be sold sometime in the relatively near future for a lot of money? And companies get sold for certain reasons. We'll talk a bit about that. And so did they want to make their company built as if they were going to sell it? 3 different outcomes, All three are wonderful. Sometimes people start down the path of one and switch to another. But we started by talking about what kind of outcomes are you trying to create. Real quickly, here's the challenge. You don't have to go through this whole, funky graph, but what happens is as companies go from size A to size B to size C, things change. The complexity of the company change. It's like a town. You can have a town of 10,000 people and it'll have some traffic lights and a few major intersections. And then if you have a town of 100,000 people, that's got to change. You've got to reevaluate the roads, the traffic, how people move, how close they live to the center of town, how easy it is to get outside of town. And then think of a city of 1 million. Again, everything's got to change. And so, what we know from a lot of research are that some companies stay small giants. Some companies go past this really important Rubicon, which is about 100 employees. And they enter this thing called no man's land, which is you got to figure out what you're going to be. Small giant, go big or go home, or build to sell. And you have to make some decisions there. And then as you go past the 100 employee mark, you're also being asked to make a whole new set of decisions about what company you want to be. And everyone in that room was there to succeed out of this process and certainly not to be one of the failures. And every one of them is in that room because they are likely to succeed. They've already got a track record for success, and they have a kind of a growth orientation that makes them likely to succeed. So when we ask them, what is the leverage available to them? In other words, what are the resources available at their companies? They may have great team members to rely on. They may have really talented individuals that they can draw in. They may have resources of their own, people they know, strategic relationships they want to develop. They may have capital they want to deploy. They may be willing to extend their brand into new ways, new areas that are, risk-oriented, but also have big outcomes. Every company has a toolbox. It's basically people, money, and time. And then there's this other categories, relationships and things like that. And so what we spent a lot of the week doing was asking every person in the room, what resources are you prepared to put at play? What tools are you prepared to take out of the toolbox to create leverage that will help you achieve the outcome you desire? That's why there's a lot of change that comes out of the program when people come home. We then talk about all of the teams back home. How do we empower you to help become part of this vision that we're trying to create, this outcome we're trying to create? And to do that, we spend a lot of time exploring the idea that CEOs, presidents, owners, the people who were in that room, they're all extremely unique individuals. But one of the things they have in common is they have a pretty easy grasp of being visionary. I think of it like this. They're very good at, let's say, leading an army where they may not know what's on the other side of the hill, but they have a vision of what's on the other side of the hill. They might say on the other side of the hill is where we need to get to. There's good things waiting for us there. There's safety, there's comfort, there's opportunity, there's resources. And it's typical that they possess that visionary quality. They're willing and able to see what's on the other side of that mountain, even if a lot of other people don't. By that, I mean, they rely on people who are highly tactical. They rely on people who can get things done. They rely on people who are focused on detail, follow through. And very often entrepreneurs are capable of detail and follow through, but their strength is in vision, seeing what's around the corner or what's over the hill and convincing everybody else that this hill is worth walking over and climbing over. And so one of the things we do is we remind them all week long that even though their strength is in vision, in creating visions, their teams have very different skill sets, essential skill sets to being successful. And they have to translate their vision into something that can be tactically approached by the team. So we always remind them, don't sound like this is simple stuff. It's not simple. It's actually complicated. And we have to translate our visions in a way that really works for these incredibly talented people we're bringing along and going along with on the journey. And they are in this room as individual CEOs to learn how to be even greater at what they do, to expand their own vision at what they do, to fill in the details. If they want to be a small giant, what does that really mean? And if they want to be go big or go home, what does that mean? And we're filling in the information based on their vision. But they've got to learn the skill of translating that vision to all of you. and remembering that what comes naturally to them may not come naturally to other people, just like what comes naturally to you doesn't necessarily come naturally to them. So, sorry about that. So we have four pillars that we explore during the course of the week, and the first is called company, but basically we focus on something called capital market readiness. In other words, how do other people look at your company? How do private equity investors look at your company? How does your bank look at your company? How does a strategic M&A or a corporate strategic partner look at your company? How do people who view the world primarily through numbers, primarily through what's called capital markets, venture capital, the publicly traded stock market, the private equity firms, they're all considered capital markets people. How do they view your company? They view your company extremely differently than we do. We view our company as operators. Every day we've got to get things done. Every month we've made commitments to customers we have to fulfill. We're very focused on the operation. But owners, which is what capital markets tend to be, look at the world differently. And we spend a lot of time helping our business owners, helping the folks in the room understand how those people, capital market people, look at our companies, because we're never going to be able to tap into all their resources, even if it's just borrowing money from the bank, even if it's taking on a minority partner, even if it's a sale one day of the company. We're never going to be able to leverage that whole world if we don't understand their language. So just as we're asking the CEOs in the room to empathize with you, to be able to translate their vision from them to you, we're also asking them to empathize with the capital markets, which is this sort of vast resource of money in all forms that has a stake in your company's outcome, whether we think about it or not. They just do. They're involved. They're there. And even if your company is never going to be sold, your competitor might be sold. And if the competitor is sold by a company that's got deep pockets, you have to take that on. So you have to know why that competitor thought that, why that deep-pocketed resource thought that that competitor was worth investing in. What did they see there, and what do we want to see about our own companies? So we spent a whole day talking about how do the capital markets view our companies, and how do we make our companies extremely attractive to the capital markets. It had nothing to do with whether we want to sell the companies or not. It has to do with the fact that we want to make sure that we're participating in that set of resources that are available to us. The next day, we covered something called financial model transformation. Financial model transformation is an exploration into our business models at an economic level. I'll give you a simple example. One of our board members is the founder and CEO of 1-800-Flowers, which probably all of us know, and probably many of us have been customers of. Well, Jim McCann started out his life as a flower shop owner. He owned one shop. 5 years later, he owned a second shop. 2 years later, he owned a third shop, fourth and fifth and sixth and 10th. He could have continued on as a flower shop builder and owner, but he transformed his financial model into something very different. He transformed it as technology evolved into an e-commerce gifting platform that does business globally. Now, he may have had 100, 1,000 flower shops, or he built 1-800-Flowers, 1-800-Flowers.com. Now, I don't know what that other vision could have looked like if he stuck with the flower stores, but I can assure you 1-800-Flowers is a very big, powerful, scalable business that leverages everything we all know and understand today about the digital e-commerce model. And so why did he do that? Well, he, like a lot of other great entrepreneurs, undertake what we call financial model transformation. They look at the core elements of what they're good at, and then they look at the different ways they can build a business model around that thing that they're good at. And so Jim was really good at recognizing the need for lots of people to recognize a moment, a birthday, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, a funeral. Interestingly, as he became global, as the company became global, the company had to learn how to celebrate those kinds of rituals in every culture. And every culture celebrates things, even things like funerals, extremely differently. And so they had to become really good at the thing that Jim was really good at, which is understanding the moment that somebody was trying to recognize or celebrate, doing it for culture after culture after culture. But he scaled it up and he leveraged technology to do it. And so we talked about capital market readiness a little while ago. Jim McCann he basically went public. You can buy 1-800-Flowers stock in the publicly traded market now, because for his transformation to be global, he needed access to a lot more money. And what you do if you're a public company is you issue stock, you sell it to people, they pay you for it, and you can use that money to grow your company. So that was his acquaintanceship with capital markets, and that was Jim McCann's financial model transformation. We had a gentleman in the program who presented named Jerry Simpson during the week. Jerry joined Birthing of Giants in 2015. His company had about 30 people and he was doing about $4 million in revenue. Over 5 years working in Birthing of Giants, he underwent significant financial model transformation. Basically today he doesn't have 30 people anymore. He's got about 60, but his revenue went from 4 million to 40 million. He doubled the number of people, but he 10x'd the amount of revenue. And then the exciting news that Jerry shared with us is that the company just sold for $1 billion. That whole exercise, which took him about 6 years, was a great example of financial model transformation. What he was doing when he came into the program at $4 million with 30 people, and what he was doing when he was doing 40 million with 60 people was very similar and very different. Very similar in that they kept doing the thing they were best at. They're a software coding company. Very different in that who they did that for and how they did it, how they got paid for it, changed utterly and completely. Financial model transformation. Then day 3, we took on amplified sales. Amplified sales is basically the professionalization of the sales program. I mean, every business runs on revenue. The truth is the lifeblood of a company is actually profit, not revenue, but it starts with revenue and it starts with bringing people in the door to buy your product or service. And we talked about how technology can change the way you do that. We talked about how understanding what people buy, why they buy it, what they're willing to pay for it, how the money they pay for it turns into profit inside your business is the key to amplifying your sales process. In short, we were asking everyone in the room, who have been in business for 5 years to 30, 40, 50 years, to consider whether inside their sales volume was an answer to where they should go next. In other words, imagine you sell 100 products and services, but imagine 20 of them are the most profitable. Then you ask, well, should I keep selling the other 80? And maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. And in those 20, then we ask the question, well, who's buying them? And maybe it's, I'll come up with a simple example. Maybe it's men more than women. So you say, gee, 20 of these products are bought more than men and they're the most profitable. Maybe our target audience should be men and maybe we should be focusing on these 20 products. If you understand the profitability and the revenue pieces of your sales program, you might make very different decisions about how you run your company. So we did that exploration. Then we looked at how technology can amplify a sales program by leveraging artificial intelligence and natural language processing and big data and predictive analytics so that our sales programs could be fully invested in technology. There's probably no place in the business world where technology is having a bigger impact right now than in the sales programs. And what's really cool about that is that it's no longer giant companies that can afford that stuff. Now, every one of us can, and almost all these tools are available for really small amounts. The trick is knowing which tools to use for your company, because everyone's company sales process is different, and how to what we call stack, how to stack them up on top of each other so that this tool helps with this part of the process, this tool helps with this part of the process. And so we build what we call a sales and marketing stack that helps us amplify our sales program. And then last of the 4 pillars we spoke about was called scalable management. Scalable management is the hardest and the most essential of all of the 4 pillars. Every company has to scale its management. I used the example of a city earlier. A city, a small town would have maybe a town manager. If the town gets bigger, they might have to go on to a full mayor. Get to be 1 million population, you're talking about a big city mayor. with a government underneath it that fits. There may have been 1 or 2 people working in that town when it was 10,000 people at an executive level. It becomes 20 people when it's 100,000 people, and it becomes 100 people when it's 1 million people. These things have to scale. The towns have to scale. The systems underneath the towns have to scale. That's management. So we're always asking the question, who's on our management team? What role should they be playing? What role did they play? Can we move them from one seat to another? Do we have to bring in seasoned, experienced people above them? These are tricky questions I'm sharing with you. They're all going to make everyone a little uncomfortable, but these are the essential questions, because as a town scales up, as a business scales up, we've got to reconsider its infrastructure. The ultimate goal of the scalable management exercise is this. You've heard this before if you've ever read a book by Jim Collins, Good to Great. Every management team has to have the right people in the right seats on the right bus going in the right direction. Now that's easy to say and very hard to do, because after all, this is the human capital part of our business, and humans are the most complicated part of the whole equation. And that's why I hope you recognize that at this exact moment, the person you work for, your CEO, your president, has asked you to become part of this story and part of this journey, because they're trying to empower you and enlist you to be part of the outcome that they were working on all week, which led up finally to the 1 year from today. So I hope you grab this mantle you grab this moment by the mantle. I hope you recognize that you're being enlisted and empowered to be part of the solution. That CEO may be a visionary. They need people to help get things done. They don't do things alone, especially as the company gets bigger. They can't do things alone. And I will share this secret with you. All of the capital markets, that whole world of banks and private equity and venture capital and corporate M&A, they all want to see that there's a high functioning management team in place. Yeah, they may meet the CEO, but quickly after that, they want to see what the team looks like underneath. And that team has to scale up in its capacity and its capability and its clarity as the company grows. The trick of a lot of businesses is that we are so lucky to start with some loyal people who are willing to join us sometimes very early on in this ride. And they are so important to us. And then what happens is the complexity grows, and that loyal person, we have to figure out if they can go to the next level with us. We hope they can, because we love the loyalty and want to reward it. But sometimes we get into this tricky moment where we need to bring someone over. So a good example might be the finance department. And I'm just saying this as an example. You may have come in as a controller, a bookkeeper, controller. There may be a time when we need to call this person a vice president of finance, and we need to empower them and give them even more responsibility. There may be another time in the future where they need to become a full-blown chief financial officer. But we're all faced with this decision. Should we elevate them from controller to VP of finance, maybe to CFO, or should at some point we bring in a CFO who's done this before? And that's always the essential fork in the road. If we are, let's say, I'll use an example that's probably not relevant to most of you, or almost any of you, is going public. Well, when you go public, you're essentially taking yourself to Wall Street or Toronto or some other big exchange, and you're saying, I'm going to share with you everything about my company. I want you to buy shares in my company. Well, the person telling that story is often a talented and experienced chief financial officer. And they have to be able to tell that story in Wall Street's terms. Now, that's not to say that you only need that when you're going public. There's lots of levels between village to town to city where you need to level up the game. But the scalable management question is a big one. It's a hard one. It's a human capital one. And again, I think you've all been invited to this call to be part of that solution. So 4 pillars: capital market readiness, financial model transformation, amplified sales, and scalable management. So we spent 4 days on each of these 4 pillars. And at the end of every single day, they were handed this little book, which many of them I'm sure have brought back and are talking to you about. Now, each company in that room was different. Each entrepreneur looks at the world differently. So the book basically says, what did you hear today that matters to you? what is the big idea that came out of this for your company? After all, your company is at its unique age and stage of its life. So what did you hear as the CEO, as the captain of that ship? And they get excited about that because they've been listening all day, they've been students all day, they've been thinking all day, they've been talking about it with each other all day. And now we ask them to capture the big idea, capture the story. And so one will write down, this discussion around financial model transformation is really important to me because I'm trying to decide, how I increase the use of technology in my business or whatever. And then they have to decide how to tell that story to the people back home. Remember, respect complexity. They may have had that moment. They may have had that moment of inspiration about the role of technology in their company, but you weren't there. And so they wonder immediately, they're thinking about you. How do I explain this to Bill or Sally or Bob or Joanne? Who should I be talking to about this? What kind of team do I have to build around this idea? Because they must share these ideas with you and ultimately delegate them to you. Because it must become your idea. It must become your project. The CEO cannot come back with 4 big ideas, and frankly, shouldn't come back with 4 big ideas that they individually execute. That's too much. And it doesn't really respect their visionary role. They need their teams, these great, wonderful, loyal people who have come along with them to help them implement. And so they think long and hard about how to delegate those ideas to each of you. And some of you may have already started this with your team, with the CEO as he or she came back from the University of Texas. Some of you may not. But let me share with you how we recommend they delegate or really transfer the inspiration, the wisdom, and the technique that we shared with them to you as they come back. Remember, there's 4 days with 4 pillars, and we're looking for them to have 4 big ideas. And so this may or may not have happened with each of your companies, but in theory, they may have planned 4 meetings. Okay, 1 meeting around finance, and 1 meeting around operations, 1 meeting around sales, 1 meeting with human resources. Every company is different. So, but they may have come back with 4 big ideas, and they may have called 4 groups together to discuss those 4 ideas. So we give them this sheet. And this sheet couldn't be simpler. It basically says, what's the big idea? What's the project? Increasing the use of technology in how we do business. What are the elements of that project? Well, we're going to have to investigate technology. We might have to hire a technology resource. We're going to have to dedicate, funds to this process. We're going to have to set up a testing opportunity, some sort of testing goal. What are the goals of this project? To increase sales by 20%, to increase profitability by 15%, to create a new sales channel that we didn't have before, to open up a new customer market that was unavailable to us. What are the goals? And what are the obstacles? Obstacles are, we've never used this technology before. Our product is difficult to ship. Our service doesn't really translate into technology so well. It's more high touch. There's lots of goals and lots of obstacles. Here's the point of this sheet. This sheet is not to be filled out by the CEO. It's to be filled out by you. So your CEO sits there and explains to you their vision, what they heard, why they heard it, what inspired them, what examples they can think of, everything that they brought together in that little red book when they were in the moment, surrounded by each other, talking about these things all day long, shutting off their cell phones, focusing on this one thing. The way we encourage them to do it is that you have this sheet in front of you and you're trying to hear what they're telling you. And at the end of it, a successful transfer of this idea would be that you captured the project elements and you wrote them down. You captured the goals and you wrote them down. You captured the potential obstacles and you wrote them down, so that we can have some sort of a paper trail. That's a little too technical, but a kind of a moment where the inspiration that they captured a week or 2 ago in a room filled with other entrepreneurs and experts is successfully conveyed to you. And you can take that moment and say, I heard you. I see what you're talking about. I get your goals. I understand what you're describing when you say that there's obstacles. You have conveyed this idea to me. And that's an exciting moment because now we know that it's not going to get lost in the stack of things on their desk. It's been successfully delegated and shared, which means that their highly capable teams can pick up the ball and run with it. And we ask one more thing, and your company may have their own process of doing this, But after, in the moment, you have captured their story, we then suggest to you and to the CEO and the team that you fill out what we call a SMART goal. Let's see. Convert it to a SMART goal. So what does it mean to convert something to a SMART goal? Well, it's in the name. It means to convert it into something that's specific, measurable, actionable, resourced, and time-bound. In other words, it's so easy to make fun of our CEO friends and our CEO bosses, but you know them, they have big ideas, they talk a mile a minute, their head is in the clouds. And that's what we need them to be. We need them to be excited about the big vision for their company, but they couldn't do it without you. And so after you've had that meeting with them, we suggest that you translate everything you heard. It might take you a week, it might take you longer to do some research. You might have to collaborate with other people in your company, but we suggest that you come back with a SMART memo, a specific, measurable, actionable, resource, time-bound description of that idea. In other words, take it out of the clouds, bring it back to earth, figure out who in the team, what resources, how much time is it going to take? Where does it fit in with the rest of our priorities? So that the big idea turns into something that actually gets done to its natural conclusion. Now, not every idea is gold. Not every idea is meant to be implemented fully, but this is your roadmap for how you take that idea from the CEO that he or she, got excited about when they were 1,000 miles away and bring it to the actual skill set, actual toolbox that exists inside the company. And the fun thing for all of us here is that, as I said, they're being introduced to some pretty big ideas around the capital markets, ways of looking at their company that they may not have been looking at. And the good news is you're coming along for the ride. You're now looking at the world the way that he or she has been trained to look at the world after 1 week with us, to think about capital markets, to think about additional resources, to think about technology, to think about gross margins, to think about cash conversion cycles, to think about things that make our companies stronger on our balance sheets, things that may or may not come up in conversation regularly, but this was the conversation we were having for a week when we were all in Texas together. I thought this was going to take an hour, but in fact, I moved through it pretty well, which is going to give us plenty of time for Q&A. But I just want to end it with this. Remember the last thing we did 1 year from today. I want to share with you that the people who joined us for this week worked really, really hard. They were heads down, they were writing, they were thinking, they were talking, they were contributing. This went on for 5 days. And I want to share with you that they deserve a pat on the back because they became students. Now, these are all adults. Many of them have been out of school for a really long time. And to ask them to become a student again, especially when they're used to being a boss, is a big deal. And they did it, and they did it happily. You can see they were excited and working hard. They were collaborating and they were passionate. And not a single business in the room was like any other. They're all different from one another. And at the end of the week, when they've been working for 4 days straight on their 1 year from today vision based on capital market readiness, financial model transformation, amplified sales, scalable management, you can see on the right hand, each person, this was Mukund doing it, he ran a technology business, each one of them gets up in front of the room and presents their 1 year from today to a seasoned group of business experts, entrepreneurs who have had tens, hundreds of millions, and even billions of dollars of exits. These are very wealthy people who have spent sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their lives becoming good at what they do. And they volunteer their time to be in the room to hear what this group came up with. And when they present their 1 year from today plans, boy, do they hear an earful back. Whether they love it or whether they hate it or anything in between, they hear. They hear the criticism, they hear the counterpoints, and occasionally they hear the congratulations. And so the week starts with a very vulnerable moment where every one of them sends an email to 10 people they trust, 10 people in their world, and asks them, what do you think of me? What do you think of how I do my work? What do you think of how I add value to my business? That's a really tough moment. And then they end the week doing the same thing, making themselves extremely vulnerable to some experts. What do you think of my idea? What do you think of where I'm going? What do you think of the outcome? What do you think of the company I've created already? And it's a tough moment and it's an intense moment. And in between, their heads are down and working. So you can imagine when they said, we want our executive teams to be as passionate about our visions, about these ideas, about the work we did at the University of Texas at Austin as we are. Well, that's just a huge moment. It's a huge moment. It's a huge leap of faith. It's a huge confirmation of the value they place on you. And so this is the moment. And in some ways it gets boiled down to this. They have 4 of those little red booklets. They should all have 4 of them. And they all contain the inspirational idea that they were thinking about at that moment, which has tons of data behind it. And then they have their 1 year from today plan, which is a really big idea, the biggest idea that has the potential to utterly transform the business. And now they're bringing it back to you and they're excited to share it with you. So I'm going to stop my share here at this moment, and I'm going to probably open it up for us all to talk a bit about this. And I'd love to hear from the executive teams what you think about this, what's still missing or unclear for you about this, what questions you have at this point about the team, about the process from here on in. Does anybody want to start? If you can raise your hand, I will see it. Let's see if we can have more of our exec team people talking than our entrepreneurs, but if we don't hear from the exec team, we're going to ask our entrepreneurs to start speaking. But before we do, here's James, our entrepreneur. Okay. Hey, James, you're muted, I think.
It's actually Tracy. I work for James. I am the head of sales. I've just joined the team within the last 3 months. My background or my career has been in taking companies and working in a support role for IPO and M&As. So I love this process. I think it's great. The one thing that really resonates with me when working with entrepreneurs is the vision side coming back and then actually being able to deliver on their vision and understanding, trying to communicate with the entrepreneur to have them understand that in theory, this all sounds easy, but implementation is a lot more difficult and detail oriented than what they might understand, because they are in the weeds, but they're not in the weeds, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
So any advice on how best to communicate back when we sit down and talk about the next steps, how we can effectively communicate on those transitions and the points that we need to hit and the hiccups we're going to have along the way to make sure the expectations are in line?
That is such a great question. What was it, Tracy? Is that the name?
Tracy, yep.
Tracy, thank you so much. So first I will share that it's so essential. It's so wonderful. And clearly you've worked with entrepreneurs before. You wouldn't have asked a question like that. So that's respect complexity. I mean, maybe those 2 words are what they need to hear. Respect the complexity. I didn't know if I would need this, but this is a book I wrote called The First Habit, and you can get it at birthingofgiants.com/the1st habit. Write out the word first, the first habit. And it's free, you can download it. But what it does is, it's the very exercise we started off with, which is what are you really good at that has to do with your company? It's the email they sent out. That little book, it's like 50 pages. It's nothing. You can read it in 1 bus ride. That little book basically says, what is it that you are good at? So what is it that Tracy's good at? And what is it that James is good at? And what we need to know, and the respect complexity moment is, okay, James, I understand how you see the world. You have a vision. We needed that component. My strength, my first habit, my language is X, is working through all the details, solving all the problems. And so it all has all the exercises in there to kind of tease this out for each of us. And so what comes naturally to you, James, is that big vision. And what comes naturally to me is to translate it into the details. But I need you to respect the complexity of what I'm doing. Just as you need to respect the complexity, just as I need to respect the complexity of what you do. And you said it, you said, I value the visionary quality of an entrepreneur. Now he needs to value the thing you bring to the table. In the book, it's called Your Language. So James has a language and he's familiar with it now after this week. You have a language and you're probably familiar with it, but maybe that book might help you just kind of clarify it in writing. But in any event, James needs to respect the complexity of what he's asking you to do. because what comes naturally to him doesn't come naturally to the other people on the team. And you need to respect the complexity of how James looks at the world, of course, too. What comes naturally to you might be to see all the potholes of an idea, all the obstacles. That's your natural skill, and we need that. And for a visionary, that's, no fun to talk about things like that. So he needs to respect your language just as you need to respect his.
That's great feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tracy. That was a great question. Anyone else want to ask a question or share a thought? Raise your hand and I'll give you the talking stick. Now, I will share that this moment, I've used the word vulnerability a lot because this is about vulnerability. These 19 individuals last week, they gave their time and they put themselves out there. They worked with complete strangers. They didn't know any of them when the week started. And you can see from those pictures, they were really getting into it with everybody. And they got in front of the room and said, what do you think? Many, many times. And so, if you don't have a question or a thought or a comment, that's okay. But this whole process works on vulnerability. In other words, if we're not willing to open ourselves up to the possibilities, it's hard to know where you fit on the team if you're not ready to be in the process. And so we are grateful for the role they played. Shannon, I'm going to give you the talking stick.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I work with James as well. And I suppose this is a question I could just ask James himself, but I'm curious in this moment, what are the next steps for the participants, like expectations of them? And is there a 1 year from now where they come back together?
Yeah. So as graduates of the Birthing of Giants Fellowship Week, and all of them went through a pretty extensive, what we call a nomination process before they were accepted. Now they've completed the 1 week, let's call it boot camp. And they completed boot camp, and now they are invited, because they're graduates and they're Birthing of Giants fellows now, they are invited to the Gathering of Giants. And the Gathering of Giants is a gathering that takes place every January for 2.5 days and every June for 2.5 days. And I'll share with you what we do there, because I think James is joining us, and if he does, he's going to come back every January and every June with the same thing on his mind. He's going to we benchmark the value of the businesses. Okay, we have a simple technique where we can say that this business is worth $10 a share. And you can see me doing my little air quotes because it's not really $10 a share, but it's just kind of a number. And then we'll do that in January. We do benchmarking, then we do goal setting, which is 1 year from today planning. And then we do accountability, which is we get on the phone with James about 4 times between January and June. How are you doing on your 1 year from today plan? Have you broken it down to 30, 60, 90-day goals? Have you identified the people who are going to help you do it? Have you identified the other resources you need to help get it done? Then they show back up in June and we redo the benchmark. Maybe the benchmark has gone from $10 to $11. That's a 10% increase in the intrinsic value of that business. How did that happen? What happened? And interestingly, while $10 to 11 or 10% might sound great, James might be talking to somebody who went from $10 to $15. And he's going to want to know how that person went 50% increase. And so those ideas will be shared. And those ideas might alter James's 1 year from today plans every 6 months, because he's going to learn from so many other people how they are growing the value of their businesses. So it's benchmarking. What's the intrinsic value of your business today? What was it 6 months ago? What was it 12 months ago? Goal setting. Let's have a 1 year from today plan that we think is realistic. And accountability. Let's set a schedule of phone calls between January and June, or June and January. They will be working with Tribes, which is our group of 6 people, 5 other business owners that they work with. And that accountability is between a professional accountability coach and their tribe, where they have to be accountable to 5 other peers, other business owners, to make progress on their plan. And not surprisingly, a lot of them say 1 year, I can get that done in 9 months. I get that done in 6 months. Entrepreneurs are naturally competitive people. So they're trying to do a great job with their 1 year from today plan and pick thoughtful goals. Sometimes they get it done faster. Sometimes it takes longer. And sometimes it turns out to be the wrong thing. It ends up being a dead end. And they identify a new 1 year from today goal. That's what's next, Shannon.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. James, you have a great, articulate group of people who are backing you up here. Anyone else want to share a thought, question, idea about what we talked about here today? I'm sure that, you know, as I said, you were invited to this meeting for a reason. Your CEO, president, boss, whatever, has a lot of faith in you. Is there something about what we heard today that doesn't make sense to you or that you want to explore further? Would love to hear from more of the exec team members on this call. And then I'm going to open it up to our fellows to just share their point of view as well. But I'd love to hear from a couple more of the team members now. Anyone have any concerns about what they heard? Again, make yourself vulnerable. This is a good place to do it. Anyone not sure that they're on board with this? Anyone think this will empower them the way they've been wanting to be empowered, or something else? Mark. Here we go, Mark. Let's see. Allowed to talk. Hey, Mark.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I had a question around measurability. Do you have some templates that would help in creating that measurement in real time versus having something that would simply just be after the fact?
Oh, in real time. Well, we are huge fans of dashboards or KPIs, scoreboards, whatever you want to call them. The way we do it is after the fact. We look at this thing called book. It's sort of book value of your business. For those of you who are financially oriented, book value is okay. It's not the secret to the universe, but it's pretty good. Warren Buffett seems to rely on it pretty heavily. He's a pretty smart guy. And so we take snapshot values of the intrinsic value of the business over time. Call it book value. We have a little clever formula we wrap around it. We call it our benchmark. But it is always backwards looking. It always looks at what happened in the previous quarter or 6 months or 1 year. In real time, dashboarding is huge, Mark. I mean, some of the folks in the room had really tight dashboards. We are big fans of the CEO having a really great dashboard to refer to that is a real-time representation of what's happening in the business. I can definitely assure you that the ones who had it bragged about it, and the ones who didn't have it, you know, you can see them furiously keeping notes. Mark, what company do you work for?
With Steve Wolf, more Surface Care. Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's basically essential that the company have a real-time dashboard. We don't talk about how to build those dashboards. However, that is a great 1 year from today goal, and there's a ton of wisdom in the room. So if Steve is in that Gathering of Giants room and he wants to walk through the room and say, hey, does anybody want to walk me through how they dashboard? He'll get a ton of input. And if you don't have a dashboard at More, yeah, you got to have one. It's got to be real time. It's got to be made up with quality numbers, and it's got to measure things that matter. And that's a process. You know, Birthing of Giants, we have a dashboard, and it's ended up being about 20 some odd metrics that we measure. And we are trying to get it to carve it back to 15 and to 10 and to ultimately just 5. Too much data can be you know, paralyzing, but data-driven organizations, you must have it. It's the future, it's the present, and you're right. It's too late to wait 6 months and look in the rearview mirror before you have an opinion about something.
Yeah.
What do you guys have at More?
I understand what you're saying from a dashboard measurability standpoint, but what I was thinking is when you get into specific projects and goals, that it breaks it down to maybe even a subset of a dashboard that would give you the feeling of what actions you were being specific about to achieve the goal, that it would maybe register on that. Like I said, we're well into the dashboards. It's just getting that real time in the actual specific goal.
Well, the SMART plan, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time bound, is meant for you to create benchmarks and milestones off of that project. But each project is so unique, it would be impossible to create a universal set of milestones.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think I saw someone else had a question before. Jessica. Hey, Jessica.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
I am.
Awesome. So I also am on James's team. I'm a recent kind of addition. And my question is, clearly our leaders have put a lot of thought into the pillars and the vision, and they'll be communicating that out to us. And do you have any advice or best practices and ways that we can show up for our leaders as this gets rolled out and we look to execute?
Again, I don't want to sound too simplistic, but that little sheet, that it's two-sided. On the one side, it's sort of got those three boxes: expect goals and obstacles and elements. I think that that's the process that is used by a lot of executive teams. Is let he or she be a visionary, let them talk, then capture what you think they said. Now, the process of converting to a SMART goal is your way of saying, I heard what you said in your words, using your language, and now I'm going to play it back to you using my language in a way that's specific, measurable, actionable, et cetera. And I mean, those are the best practices for any organization where, you are part of a category, all of you are part of a category called entrepreneurial capitalism. The next level up would be called corporate capitalism. And the next level up is even higher. It's not such a great place. It's called crony capitalism. But entrepreneurial capitalism is relatively pure. It usually starts with this individual, sometimes more than one of them, but they are intense visionaries. And they have these qualities of sharing their ideas, and they may not be MBAs. I don't think there were too many MBAs in the room last week, maybe one or two out of 19. They're not formally trained in business management. And so it's not uncommon for them to spill it all out there in a way that really is hard for people to capture. And so your point is a good one, Jessica. They can be encouraged to do that more. We always say, respect the complexity. But I think if you stick with either the thing we gave you or your own company's version of it, where you say, you used your language, here's my language of what I heard, that's that great moment. And I think that's showing up, that translation, that translatory moment when and this is true of all relationships. I heard how you said it and what you said. I heard what's important to you. Let me tell you what I heard, and let me tell you how I interpret it. It's all grounded in empathy, which I know is true at Righteous, and I know it's important for a lot of the companies here, is that having empathy for each other is, I don't mean, this is not the beginning of a rom-com here. Empathy is real. Empathy is a real business resource. It's a vibrant part of business life. And so one of the things that gets forgotten is that even CEOs need empathy. They look at the world the way they look at the world. You look at the world the way you look at the world. I know James has empathy for all the people who work for him. And I know you do, or want to, or talking or thinking about how you can have empathy for him. And that wonderful moment where the idea gets translated. Gosh, I do wish, although I'd never be able to keep my mouth shut, I do wish I could be a fly on the wall as these guys, men and women, come back from our week together and translate their ideas to their teams, because I would basically be reminding them to respect the complexity.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Great team you have there, James. All right, so we've only have a few more minutes left. Are there any of our CEOs they want to share a few points of view about what they heard today? Oh, Steve Friedman. Okay, Steve Friedman from Platinum Filings. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, how are you? How you doing?
Hey, Stephen. Good, thanks.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
All right. The only thing I wanted to mention, first of all, James, wow. He's got a real motivated crew there. Got to give him credit.
Yeah.
But I'm not shocked about that. But only thing I would mention that I think some of the companies that have their executives on the line might benefit from, and maybe if Louis, if you could take a 2-minute to do it, is I noticed that part of our group, one of the things that some of even the companies that were doing, crazy amounts of sales and crazy goals that really kind of threw them off was the focus on profit versus the top line. And I think that's an item that a lot of them are probably going to struggle with when they try to communicate that to their teams. I mean, all of us, you know, and I think it maybe be a good idea to, if you can just, maybe they don't want to bring it up because it might be a issue of contention. We certainly had some of our colleagues that did a presentation and were kind of distraught about these two directions. So I think that would be helpful. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think maybe some of the CEOs would like their executive teams to be able to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Well, that's a great, you know, Steve, without knowing it, you just walked into a really powerful landmine, because guess what? Every business owner will tell you that profit is the lifeblood of the business. It's just everything. If there is no profit, there is no business. But what I'm about to say is crazy, but when we survey people who work for entrepreneurs, they think the word profit is a bad word. They think that it's somehow the ugly part of the business, almost as if to say, this is how the boss gets rich off of our labor. This is how the boss gets over on all of us. That's what they tell us. Now, business owners, gosh, I mean, if you think about it, a business owner will tell you that everyone gets paid before them. And some months that means they get paid nothing. Some months that means they get paid a lot. Certainly in the early years, it could happen like that. And so the idea that profit is a four-letter word or a bad thing is crazy to them, because they're always putting their people and their vendors and their customers ahead of them. But it doesn't matter if the profit's a little or a lot. Okay, it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to say some silly things here. It doesn't matter if the profit, you know, gives somebody an okay lifestyle or makes them so stupid rich that they're, you know, ridiculous. Because most of us build companies just to run functioning financial factories where everyone gets paid before us. And sometimes what's left over is a lot, and sometimes what's left over is a little. I really believe this, that, you know, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk may be the wealthiest person in the world. I mean, who cares? They never set out to be the wealthiest person in the world. They set out to build high functioning businesses that happen to produce so much extra profit that they became that thing called the richest people in the world. And that's not the case for our entrepreneurs, but they may be doing well. They may be doing very well. And so when we ask our teams to consider profit, we are not trying to insult anyone. We are not trying to get them to think in this negative way about profit. The beautiful thing that the word profit represents is you've got sales, revenue, top line. You've got the operation, which is, you know, getting it all done, delivering these commitments we made to our clients, and you have what's left over. And the only way you have something left over is when the sales and the operations work together, you know, when they work in concert with each other. Yeah, you can blame sales for not bringing enough top line, but we can blame operations for not doing it well enough. This is a great moment for human collaboration, for empathy. And what's left over, you know, if that collaboration is functioning highly, what's left over is a profit. If it's a really, really high collaboration, there's a lot of profit. And that's all good. It just means that the collaboration is working really, really well. Stephen, is that sort of touching on where we were going?
Yeah, that is. And I think maybe to add to it, the difference between gross margin versus, you know, just doing sales, that one of the key items was the focus on healthy gross margins, even if you're hitting crazy numbers in sales, but you could potentially be cutting yourself thin and running yourself into a wall with a lot of work.
Yeah, very common challenge is, you know, okay, the company went from 10 million to 15 million, or from 50 million to 200 million in 5 years. And everyone celebrates that, and they should. But there's a lot of really important, this is such a fast moving business. And when businesses are growing as fast as your businesses are growing, it's the systems are constantly changing. We talked earlier about villages become towns, become cities. The systems are changing so fast. And so how do we keep these things coordinated? And so sometimes, actually lots of times, to be honest, we find that a company is selling a lot of something, but they're making very little profit from it, because they're selling to a client, a happy client, an excited client, and they're throwing, you know, a lot of resources, a lot of business their way, and everyone feels good about it. But it's also a difficult client, or it's a difficult product to deliver, and there's just not that much money left over at the end of the day. And so we start to look at which of the things we sell actually produces profit that can be used to build the business. You know, how do you buy a new piece of machinery? How do you rent a bigger office? It's not with the revenue, it's with the profit. It's not with the top line, it's with what we call gross margin. what's left over after we delivered the product or service to our client. And in this room for a week, the words gross margin and EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, but really, it's really profit. EBITDA is the silly fancy word for it. The word gross margins and EBITDA, I mean, we just talk about it all week long because maybe we're celebrating top line at our companies, but we actually have to figure out where the profit or the growth, what's left over after gross margins, where are the most profitable things we're doing. Very common for people to discover that the thing they thought was the most profitable, I mean, the thing they thought was the most valuable because it had the most top line is actually far from the most profitable. And they have to ask themselves, which do I value? The top line revenue number that I got from that product or service, or the profit that these other things deliver to us that are maybe not growing as fast, but they might be delivering more profit. Great, that's a great question. Thanks, Stephen. Okay, folks, we're gonna wrap it up. We said we would be here for 1 hour. We went 3 minutes over. We are super interested in your feedback. If you want to share it either, I'm sure the entrepreneurs will share it with us inside the Slack channel or DM me. And if you want to share it with us, you're welcome to. My email address is ls@begiants.co, ls@begiants.co, and happy to hear from anybody. I also know that, again, just to end where I started, you are invited to this call because your boss thinks that you are an integral part of the solution, of the vision of the business. And so if you think that we can be helpful to you, if you think that there's a big opportunity at your company that you can be even a bigger part of, definitely let the boss know, let the CEO know. They didn't put you in this call for no good reason. And certainly if our entrepreneur fellows want us to be any more helpful than we've been after this 1 hour, we are in it to win it. Thanks everybody for being part of this initial program, and have a great weekend.